Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and what's this? Competitive Yu-Gi-Oh content? I can't believe it. Not on my MBT channel. Where's Junior Journey? Where's Jank Bank? What was the name of the show that I had where I would... Where's Turbo Tuesday? Listen, I've been testing a lot of CYAC format, both with and without a hypothetical ban list that we might be getting in some number of days. Anytime now, by the way. Did you guys know that Monodium Tryhard has a defensive psychic blade? So I thought I would share with you all some of my insights after playing a bunch of games of the new format and what decks I expect to be good after we've just experienced the first weekend of results. Please bear with me. This is not a type of content I'm used to. Usually I make more high concept, important, culturally relevant pieces of art. Like when I ask people what monster has the loosest bussy on Twitter and get 100k. All right, Yu-Gi-Oh! So first off, let's begin with Tier 1. Now, these are the decks I expect to be the highest... What are you are all spamming already? So rather than just put each one of these decks on the chart in order, I want to go from top to bottom. The decks that I think are the best, followed by the decks that I think are slightly less good, less good, less good, and then terrible, which I have written high potential for. You might as well write copium there, but I'll explain why I think the decks that I put in high potential have high potential, despite the fact that, you know, there's pretty much no way that they're playable in any sort of reasonable capacity. Let's begin with the deck that I think is the best moving into the CYAC format, and I am so very sorry to have to deliver this terrible news to you, but it is unquestionably Tira. I know new CYAC decks, oh my god, Purely and Super Heavy Samurai are going to be absolutely incredible, is something that I would feel comfortable saying if Tira wasn't playable. Tira is just, it's so many things, it just does everything. Why is everyone saying ass Tira? Why is everyone saying Bedge? Come on! Here's the deal with Tira. It's good. In my estimation, Tira is just so far above the purview of anything else. It not only has consistent and powerful lines going first that can shut off individual plays available to opponents, but it also has the capacity to go second. Cards like Fenrir and Unicorn are really good when you get to trigger their effects natively because you're attacking. One of the other things that Tira has going for it is a natural immunity to a lot of the hand traps that I think are going to populate decks this format. Decks like Super Heavy Samurai have changed the math on hand traps so far as people are playing cards like Droll Lockbird, Ghost Ogre, and Snow Rabbit, and while Tira definitely does have trouble against Droll Lockbird for some specific opens, frequently they don't care at all. Add to that an unbelievably good Pearly matchup, and the fact that it makes a macro Cosmos in a format where a bunch of stuff has to go to the graveyard in order to get repeated activations, and it's not hard to see why I expect this deck to be the best thing moving into the upcoming CYAC format. It's also why I expect there to be a list before the Philly YCS. It'd really suck if, like, everyone was excited to play these new decks, and then it just turned out Tira was the best by a lot. So I think Tira is the only deck that I feel comfortable calling Tier 1. The next two decks I'm going to put in Tier 1.5. These are decks that I don't think like are super competitive with Tira, but I think if a ban list shakes out in a way that Tira is hit, these could easily become Tier 1, and unsurprisingly, the second one is Super Heavy Samurai. I think that Super Heavy Samurai is an incredibly powerful deck going both first and second. It has unbelievable lines that play through just about anything under the sun, with two really big exceptions. Listen, there's got to be a combo deck in the format, and the combo deck that gets to play 12 one-card starters, but also 20 non-engine is probably the one to pick. The downside to Super Heavy Samurai is twofold. Firstly, I think it's got a pretty big weakness to Droll Lockbird, which a lot of people are starting to understand, as well as commonly boarded hand traps like Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit on the Scarecrow. And secondly, because of the weird stipulation within Super Heavy Samurai that you can't play spells and trap cards, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong for it, especially post-boarding. You don't get access to really powerful equalizers that make up the difference when facing opposing combo strategies on the draw. Also, you like have to rely on non-engine, but you have to open your one-card combo as well. It's really easy to get into a position that Mathmech was getting into for the past 6 months, where you just draw 5 hand traps and stare at your opponent. That said, it's still an extremely consistent and powerful combo deck, and I do expect it to be very playable, especially if Tira gets hit. Next up is Pearly. Pearly is in such a strange position for this format. So if you're unfamiliar with Pearly, first, I don't blame you. Pearly is not a deck at present, right? This deck fucking sucks. It's the worst deck of all time. I'm putting it in Tier 1.5 rather than putting it in Tier 3 where I think it belongs. Here's how Pearly works. You utilize quick play spell cards that all discard a card in order to summon Pearlies from deck, which once per turn reveal the top 3 cards of your deck and potentially add another quick play to hand. If you play this right, you can chain a whole bunch of them together and then end on a whole bunch of Pearlies on your side of the field, which you can then overlay for like Lyrilisk, Ensemble, Robin, and also a 16-mat E-Pearly Plump, which you can rank up using Pearleap into E-Pearly Noir, which obviously just shuffles like 45 cards from your opponent's board back into the deck. In theory, it sounds really good. In practice, it's got a couple things going against it. Firstly, its main combo play aims to draw a couple of cards using the effect of Pearly Sleepy Memory in the standby phase, and then do the same thing again after you rank up with Perleap. But in practice, because you have to be on a critical mass of the quick play spells and a critical mass of non-engine, it's not like you can just expect you're going to draw into interaction. A lot of your board is just going to be concentrated in that Noir. Secondly, Kaijus are unfortunately getting main decked now. It turns out the same cards that beat Arise Heart Pass also beat Pearly, just fiat, like on face. Things like Santa Claus eat this deck alive, and they will be played both by this deck, against this deck, and by any deck that has any space whatsoever. As a result, it's in this really weird space where it has a lot of raw concentrated power, but it's power play that is meant to insulate you against a lot of the non-engine that it loses to, which happens to be the same non-engine that better decks lose to, doesn't even necessarily draw you into the cards that enable you to rebuild or prevent your opponent from killing you. I think there are scenarios in which this deck becomes like best deck, but it would require an OCG style let's hit absolutely everything. Tier 2, Joshua Schmidt, I'm sorry. I think the fourth best deck is MathMech.
Oh, no! Why did you do that?
I'm not coping. I'm not coping. Here's the thing with MathMech. Like Super Heavy Samurai, it has the capacity to do a one-card combo, this time using MathMech Circular instead of Super Heavy Samurai Prodigy Wakaushi, and then fill up on non-engine. This can play upwards of 20 non-engine, just like Super Heavy Samurai if it desires, if it goes for a lower ceiling end board. The unfortunate truth is its end board is going to be a lot less explosive than Super Heavy Samurai, but a lot more resilient to a lot of the board breakers that would give Super Heavy Samurai trouble. It's also a lot more flexible. Builds, I don't think, have solidified yet. People haven't decided if they want to be playing Firewall Defensor and to what end. Individual setups can go radically different ways, depending on what you have opened. This deck has an incredible weakness to Droll and Lockbird, which is a terrible place to be right now, but there are hands that can play through it, and there is the capacity to extend through it if you're willing to just end on Heat Soul Conflict Pass or something like that. The issue with this at present is that I don't think people know what they want to actually do with these cards. It's clear there's a lot of power concentrated in cards like Firewall Defensor and MathMech Circular, but to what end still is kind of up in the air. It's clear that the old board of going like Wicked plus Masquerena plus Lingaribo is just not strong enough to compete with a consistent Tira build or even stuff like Pearly or Super Heavy Samurai, but the alternative, like just going for a one-card Terahertz setup, loses so badly to the Kaijus that people are playing main deck that it's almost not even worth considering. That said, this still has the capacity to just go Update Jammer access code, kill you, so it's fine. Next up is Sprite. Boy, Sprite is in an awful position right now. Sprite's fine. Sprite's been fine for the last 8 or 9 formats. It's a decent deck. It's also got a lot of capacity to change. You know, the Melfi stuff wasn't considered standard until the 250th YCS, for instance. That said, it's got a lot going against it. Like a lot of top decks, it's got to compete with Droll and Lockbird, and now people are main decking Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, which people were playing way back when, to beat this deck in particular because of the way Gigantic Sprite detaches for effect rather than cost. It's also in a really weird position in terms of the ban list. This is probably like the 4th or 5th best deck, but because it has a longer lifespan than something like Pearly or Super Heavy Samurai, which haven't topped at all, it's in a really weird stasis where like it's not great, but it could still snag a hit on the ban list like blue to 1, and then it is just, it's Jover. It's just Jover. It's just absolutely Jover. Let's go to tier 3. Time to get a little contentious. I'm going to start saying stuff that makes absolutely no sense. First up, Branded. I don't like Branded's position right now. I think that it loses to a lot of the floodgates that people board in for when they're going first, like Dimensional Barrier. I think it bricks in the exact same way that it's bricked for the last 6 months. I think the new cards in Branded make your end board a lot more resilient, but I don't think they resolve Branded's #1 problem, which is there are some hands where you just absolutely need your Branded Fusion to resolve, or you are going to die. Theoretically, there are scenarios in which New Quem can assist you with some of those setups, but I don't think the backup setups are good enough to beat the high ceiling setups of something like Tira. Really powerful deck full of really powerful cards that I think is just very badly positioned. Labyrinth. Labyrinth's good. I'm just afraid that Labyrinth might catch some strays as Konami hits some really powerful trap cards that have kind of lived their natural lifespan, floodgates and the like. Labyrinth actually got a lot in the most recent set. Cards like Chaos Angel are technically makeable in Labyrinth. If you go back to Dogmatica Punishment, you can start using Garginual to get Lulawilith into your rotation. You have pressure on your opponent, which you didn't before. There's also builds of Labyrinth that are just on like furniture and like 5 traps total. That I think are so different than the way we played Labyrinth previously that they might actually be like worth a reevaluation of the archetype as it is, like in its matchup spread. That said, there's a lot of bad cards in this deck. And finally, Dragon Link. Listen, literally every single time any new card is released, I immediately think that Dragon Link is a top tier deck. I don't know. There's something wrong in my brain that makes me think this. I don't know. I don't know why. There's some new synchros that are fantastic parts of a Dragon Link end board. Things like Dispater. They can make Chaos Angel without blinking an eye. If decks like Mathmech are top tier, cards like Magnemite get a lot better. But a lot has to go right for Dragon Link to be in a good position. Like, all of those plays have to be game-winningly strong, and there has to be a favorable metagame for their big-ass DD Crows, in my opinion. And that's it. Let's do high potential. First up is Monodium. This deck actually took some names at the Nationals that were held this past weekend. This is a Synchro combo deck, and there's a bunch of new powerful Synchro monsters. It's missing a second wave of support that'll, I think, bring it into tiered metagame contention, but for now, it's something you definitely should have a plan for, despite the fact that I think that it's probably not good as the decks above it. Fluandereeze is a really cool deck. It's got access to Time-Rending Morganite now, which is almost a custom card specifically for this archetype. Even though it doesn't have access to a barrier statue, it can loop M-Pens and like activate the effect of Ryza 2 or 3 times a turn, which is difficult for any deck to keep up with. Its biggest issue is that a lot of people are playing Droll and Lockbird, and if this card ever sees Droll and Lockbird, it will immediately scoop. There's a bunch of new cool combos you can do with Sword Soul. Ringo Worm opens up the capacity to like play it as a second long one. You open like Emergence plus Ringo Worm, and you can go like Emergence for Taya, normal Taya, Taya, banish Emergence, summon a token. There's Ringo Worm, and then you just do a Chi-Shao into a 10 using the Chi-Shao as material, and then you can bring back the Ringo Worm, and you can make Shaman, and then you can reborn the Chi-Shao. It's like a very specific setup, but the deck is kind of hurting for a fourth name. Theoretically, this could be that. I just don't know if it raises the ceiling enough for it to actually be considered metagame viable. Traptrix is incredibly strong. It's got a lot of really powerful tools and the ability to rank 4 spam into their tribal monsters extremely well. This deck just has a really big problem with one card in particular, which I feel like I probably shouldn't name. I don't want to tell you all the card that it has a problem with. The other problem with this card is the most powerful end board that it can possibly put up occasionally puts up like a bunch of trap holes that the top decks just don't even play into. Like, it turns out a bunch of conditional removal spells aren't as good when your opponent knows about them, and even if you end on a bunch of really powerful rank 4s, there's a ton of cards that deal with those. Tearlament! So, in a theoretical future where Kashtira gets absolutely nerfed, I will be considering this deck. You all don't understand. It gets so good if you can consistently play without having to worry about a macro. So Navalone Rika is in a very beneficial position from my perspective. It seems like the deck that has the most capable end board that can beat like the most individual kaijus drawn in a hand and the most blowout spell traps. It just puts up like varied points of interaction with a bunch of negates cycled here and there in a capacity that a lot of decks aren't capable of dealing with. It could theoretically be the combo deck that goes over the top, but who knows? I don't know. But it competes for space with the other combo decks in the format, and I think it's probably less capable at going second than they are. So, Marincess. So I'm a firm believer in Marincess. I think it's in a really good position, like Super Heavy Samurai and Mathmech, where it's like a bunch of one-card combos, and then you just end up drawing like 4 or 5 pieces of non-engine. Not only like searchable stuff like Marincess Wave, but ending on like Drawn Droll is just an FTK. You have Bubble Reef in order to draw into a couple of copies of it, and then post-board you can check blowouts with Aqua Argonaut. The problem it has is the same problem decks like Pearly do, which is kaijus, but it has the capacity to play around them in a better way, provided those decks are playing exactly Santa Claus and not something like Gamciel, because you can use June Moon to theoretically go into Barrier Statue of the Torrent, though many people in chat are telling me that that's a terrible play. And finally, Gold Pride. Gold Pride put up some results at the most recent national tournaments. I think it's good. I think it's an interesting deck. I think it interacts with opponents in ways that decks are not prepared to deal with, but I think it has a really high capacity to brick. I think that people haven't really solved what they want to do with the engine. There's a lot of raw power concentrated in it, but they don't know how to deploy it or with what to play it. And I think right now the outcome is a deck that's extremely confused and frequently just relies on pep to carry them through matchups that they otherwise would have no shot of winning. So that's how I see this format shaking out. I'm ready to be extremely wrong, as I have been pretty much any time I've prognosticated about any format ever. Let me know what decks you'd like to see me talk about in the future, or what you think I got wrong in this video, and I will be ignoring those comments. Dinomorphia, Time Rules. Valence. Oh yeah, let me play a deck that FTKs with Cyberstein that's not Super Heavy Samurai. Mikanko. I'm not reading those cards. Ninja. Listen, you're not sneaking this one in past me, Vlad. Exosister. Wow, everyone's playing Kaiju. Time to make Magnifica. Drytron. Drytron might be good this format. Drytron could be good. Then again, it could not. Goatee. What do you want me to say about Goatee? Go teach yourself a better deck. Constellar? Don't watch Vlad's videos. Dogmatica Ritual. Now you're talking, GCD. How about that cool ABC AFD Therion deck? Decks right now have to play a whole bunch of non-engine, and that one can't.